6:44 morning to you, watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
Should we take a look at today's front pages? And there is only really one story in town that's dominating the front pages, and that's Boris.
Yeah, the Times says the party's over now as he quits as an MP.
The Daily Mail summarises Boris' sensational departure from Parliament into 4 key points.
We'll tell you what they are a little bit later. The Guardian details his angry outburst at the Partygate investigation.
Yeah, he released a statement that was something like 1,400 words long.
Like that, yeah.
And he really had a go. He must have sat down at the typewriter last night.
How old are you?
Yeah, I know. And he must have furiously just kept going.
Yeah.
It's quite a read.
It is. Anyway, let's see what the co-founder of the Together Association, Alan Miller, and journalist and author Ella Whelan make of it all. Good morning to you both.
Good
morning.
Alan, let's start with the Times, should we? He's having a go at this kangaroo court.
Indeed. So this is something that Boris Johnson knew about and went ahead with. He has lambasted the fact that Harriet Harman's leading it, and also criticised heavily Rishi Sunak, a range of the policies in the Conservative Party in terms of taxation and growth, calling it a kangaroo court, etc. He's also saying that he thinks it's partly to do, more significantly to do with Brexit. And frankly, I think that he's got a point. I think that, yes, I do. I think that if you, there are many things that I would argue, and I, the Together Association challenged lockdowns and restrictions and impositions consistently, vaccine passports, the mandate, lots of policies that we thought were very damaging for the country. We're now in a cost of lockdown, cost of living crisis, inflation. We warned about many of these things, damages to health, the NHS, children, and other things. So if that was the basis on what he was being democratically challenged on and forced out effectively, I would say, well, fair play. It just seems that on this basis, a bit similar to some of the issues around what's happening we're seeing in the public sector and elsewhere, that there is somewhat of an agenda around this. And I'm not celebrating him being ousted like this, nor what I think is a bit akin to a coup with what happened at the time. So I think that he's got some points, although obviously he's, like Boris Johnson does, somewhat self-obsessed within all of this. But the bigger question for us all is, when we reflect on all of this, is what does this all mean for us moving forwards in the future in terms of accountability, because we've seen other news stories today which we'll come on to, and where is the public within all of this? You know, he was voted in with a huge mandate with millions, which he refers to as it's like a really important, huge debate in Britain around Brexit. And I do concur with some of his points that many are attempting to suffocate some of those things now, and I think that's a concern.
Do you reckon, Ella?
I think Alan's right. He was hated from the start by a significant section of his own party because of the way in which he was able to capitalise on the Brexit moment. I think there's probably a lot of Conservatives that didn't like the fact that he had kind of popularised the party, that whole kind of 2019 movement, bringing in all those fresh former Red Wallers. I think that probably stuck in the craw of a few older Conservative MPs, and I think that all feeds into it. But, it's the case that he's also sort of never really admitted, not whether or not he had a drink at a party or any of those things that are sort of relatively superficial, but he hasn't ever come up and admitted to the fact that some of the policies that his government put in place while he was in power were wrong. I mean, there's been these rumours coming out that he said at the time of, I can't remember, it was one of the second lockdowns or something, he's now come out since and told people, well, I knew it was wrong and I didn't think we should do it. And that's no good. That's no good to say that after the fact. The time when you raise your concerns is when you can have an effect.
But that's not why he's been ousted.
That's not why
he's been ousted over what you just said, for the trivial things.
Which I think a lot of, I don't know, maybe people can, text you guys in and tell what they think, because I have this overriding sense that people are really sick of the Partygate issue. They're really sick of the more superficial elements of this. And if there is something to talk about in relation to lockdown or the pandemic, it is those more fundamental things that Alan pointed to about effects on children, effects on the economy, and all the rest of it, which we have to keep reminding ourselves, this inquiry is really not touching. It's not asking the big political questions.
No.
It's asking the kind of smaller political questions about which MP lied about this and which political aid was in the room when this happened. And I don't know, I'm really bored of that. I don't know about you guys.
And I'm bored of it. I'm bored of it. But yeah, every time we mention this, we get a lot of people saying, yes, it's all nonsensical. Nobody really cares about a slice of cake and a glass of whatever it was. But we also get a lot of people getting in touch saying, well, this matters.
Yes.
We were told to do one thing.
And while they
were
were
doing something
partying,
else.
my dad died.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So we
you can't brush it
can't
away, can you?
dismiss it.
No.
Well, I think it's very true that there are huge ramifications and consequences for people, and he and the government should be held accountable, and the opposition for arguing for more consistently. When, frankly, they had the information. It's also, we're often told we don't know all these things, but there was a lot of data early on about the vulnerability levels of people and who were most at risk and what could and should be done. People like Professor Carol Sikora warned about things like the consequences to cancer, as well as stroke and heart disease for these measures, a COVID-only NHS system. Many of these things are in place. He has also made the point that it's not possible to actually address these issues. So he's maintaining his position that he didn't lie, whether he lied or not. But this idea that them working together, I think what it does reflect is there is an issue that they knew that some people could work together in this context. They should have been honest about that. This is the thing that's very galling for people, and people who, particularly care homes, the way that families were treated, people were isolated and separated, absolutely unacceptable. And we need to make sure moving forwards we learn the lessons from that and prevent it and stop it. We still have over 40,000 care workers that lost their positions as a consequence of a mandatory vaccination imposition that never, fortunately, didn't happen to the rest of the NHS. We're still reeling from a lot of these things. If they're the issues that he was brought up on, I think they'll be much more credible. And we don't know, for this point about whether he's lied to Parliament, that issue is important, right? The idea of being honest and transparent, which they haven't been for a lot of other things. The problem is, of course, it increases complete cynicism and distrust, which isn't a positive dynamic, because people just think, oh, there's nothing, everyone's the same, there's nothing you can do, particularly after one of the biggest political things to have happened in Britain, under Brexit, where people did get animated and passionate, and now they think, oh, this is what happens. But I would just say that together we do say that the public, this is another reason why people need to be involved at the coalface and get involved, because it's really going to be up to us to have an influence to shape things much more.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. Ella, in The Guardian this morning, Rishi Sunak's under fire over Boris Johnson's resignation list.
Yeah, well, from the coalface to the House of Lords, I think this is one of those moments where, despite the fact that politically I'm opposed to him on many, many things, and I think his behaviour is a lot of the time pretty bad, this is one of those moments where you sort of have to love the cheek of Boris Johnson, in a way, because his list of people who are up for peerages, OBEs, Order of the Baths, all these different kind of honours that a former Prime Minister, it is within the gift of a former Prime Minister to give. Some of them are quite, they're sort of relatively straightforward, but then some of them are a bit more outlandish, making his political aides, Ross Kempsell and Charlotte Owen, put up for peerages. They're going to be very young members of the House of Lords. You might say that's a good thing. You might say it's pushing it a little bit. There were some that were rejected, so, sort of infamously now, given the fact that she stepped down as an MP, Nadine Dorries was put forward as a peerage. That was rejected, along with Alex Sharman, Nigel Adams and Alistair Jack. There's also, the fact that he put some of these people who were embroiled within the Partygate scandal up for peerages. His Chief of Staff, Dan Rosenfield, and gave a CB to Jack Doyle, has raised the sort of hackles of a lot of people. And The Guardian is sort of asking the question of why Rishi Sunak allowed all of this to happen. I mean, about 7 paragraphs down, it points out that it's just convention, that that's what you do. There's nothing, it's not that Rishi Sunak had a genuine kind of a choice. If he was going to reject it, it would have been a massive, massive deal. But, you do have to also remind people that from my point of view anyway, as someone who's a Democrat, there is no good elections to the House of Lords. They are all undemocratic. And Labour prime ministers, Tory prime ministers previously have always put always put their friends into it. They don't sit there and think, what's good, what person would be good for the country? I know Sally, who lives on number 22 Allen Road, who's a really good at her job. She'll be a good Lord. That's not what happens. They put their friends in. And so this is a kind of a non-story. But I think the fact that I think it's just a reminder, and particularly a reminder to Rishi Sunak, that Boris Johnson is not going away. This is a man who's going to be involved for a long time.
Is it suggested, it certainly is in some of the commentary, that they didn't want to give her a peerage because that would trigger a by-election in her constituency. So what's happened is she's resigned, and still we're going to get a by-election in that constituency. Isn't that mighty mismanagement by somebody?
Well, yes. Well, you might think it. Well, or perhaps it's just proving the fact that Nadine Dorries is either such a big fan of Boris Johnson that they've made some kind of manoeuvres and gone together, or it's just the kind of a show of how much spite there is within the Conservative Party at the moment. And as Alan says, the same as sort of cynicism in politics at large. You don't, as much as I think it might be sort of comical to watch them fall apart, it's not good for the country that you have a government that is eating itself, that is at war with itself, that cannot do anything substantial because they're just too busy backbiting each other.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really help, does it? Ella, Alan, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Loads of you getting in touch in this. Alan says, I'm no fan of Boris, but even I believe he was a victim of the establishment. I believe a new political party is about to be born.
Elaine says, I don't blame him. It has been a witch hunt. It's been pathetic, and I don't blame him, but what else can he do? We voted for Boris, not the Conservative Party. He's got charisma. Most leaders do.
Well, we'll have much more to come on that resignation very shortly. This is GB News.